Good morning. It's Monday, February 9th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 856 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FTD Morning Brief. All right, folks, it was a big night last night for the Seattle Seahawks, but we have an even bigger week ahead in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is making an urgent trip to the United States to try to get on the same page as Donald Trump as relates to Iran. He's got his work cut out for him. Talks are still officially ongoing in Oman with a huge amount of American firepower still in the region, bearing down on the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, the Board of Peace is slated to meet in 10 days from now to chart a new course in Gaza, except here's the catch. Hamas is refusing to disarm. That comes straight from the horse's mouth, that of Khalid Meshal, one of the group's last remaining leaders. He was speaking from, wait for it, Qatar. And the regime in Iran is refusing to give up its nuke program, such as it is. That comes straight from multiple regime figures. This is not a failure to communicate, folks. This is a failure to agree. And that leads to conflict, which Trump says he's trying to avoid. We're going to keep watching, but I don't get a sense we're going to be watching the triumph of diplomacy anytime soon. In the meantime, the map of the Middle East continues to shift in real time. It's not just the weakening of the Iranian regime and its proxies, although that's a part of it for sure. The battle between the Gulf's two most influential states, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, continues. It's happening in places like Yemen, Sudan, and beyond. Those neo-Ottoman Turks want to fill the void in places like Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and even Jordan. Israel would love to project its own power, but its ability to do so is limited. I see modest soft power projection in Syria through the Druze, into the Horn of Africa through the recognition of Somaliland, and a little bit of hard power in Lebanon with strikes on Hezbollah. But remember, folks, despite what the haters say, Israel's natural posture is defensive. That's why they call the IDF the Israel Defense Forces. They're not naturally inclined to fight too far from home. But here's the catch. If Trump doesn't move against Iran and tensions continue to escalate in the region, there's a good chance the Israelis revert to rising lion mode. Those F-35s will make the 1,000-mile schlep out to Iran again to neutralize the ballistic missile threat and maybe take some shots at the Houthis while they're at it. We've had a few months of relative quiet in the Middle East, and I'm grateful for that. But the plates continue to shift. The map is still being redrawn. One way or another, the war in the Middle East will intensify. It already feels a little past due. All right, lots of news this weekend, so let's do a quick roundup so we're all up to speed. The Brits have dispatched fighter jets to the Med. They sent it to the island of Cyprus. That's according to the Sunday Times in the UK. Here's the part where I remind you that the Brits actually shot down a bunch of Iranian drones fired at Israel during the smaller skirmishes between the two countries back in 2024. Is this a sign of imminent conflict? Who the hell knows? But it's not exactly a sign of imminent peace. The Olympics are underway. If you're not aware, you're living under a rock. And the politicization of sports is back in full swing. Pro-Hamas protesters descended upon Milan to try and make life difficult for Israeli athletes. And the Israeli bobsled team had their rooms ransacked and robbed. So much for the Olympic spirit. The Israeli airline, El Al, is under fire for price gouging. And let me be clear here. This airline absolutely gouged its customers after other carriers wimped out and stopped flying to Israel. It was a disgusting display of greed by this airline. Before the war, I avoided El Al like the plague. During the war, I didn't often have a choice, and it felt like my head was going to explode every time I heard the purser say, "Thank you for choosing El Al, as if I had a choice." After the war ends, I plan on accruing lots of loyalty points from other airlines. El Al was reportedly fined $39 million for price gouging. I don't think that's enough. Hamas leader Khalid Meshal rejected the U.S. peace deal for Gaza at a conference in, wait for it, Qatar. Meshal is under sanctions here in the United States, and the Qataris apparently don't give a damn. Ditto for UN nutball Francesca Albanese. She headlined the conference in Doha too, although I think she did it from abroad. A reminder here that Qatar disrespects our sanctions, and it continues to be the worst major non-NATO ally ever. And finally, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham let the commander of the Lebanese armed forces have it on Friday. Rudolf Heikel was in the United States looking for support from U.S. leadership, but he was apparently unwilling to call Hezbollah what it is, a terrorist group. Graham unleashed on him, just ripped him a new one and cut the meeting short. Attaboy, Lindsey, give him hell, make Lebanon great again. Oh, and just in, the Israelis reportedly captured an operative from Lebanon's Muslim Brotherhood branch last night. That was all happening while Hezbollah assets were going boom in a few other places. The low flame continues in the land of the cedars. Something's got to give. All right, ladies and germs, it's time to bring on Reuel Marc Gerecht. Reuel is a repeat offender on this program. He's a longtime Iran watcher here at FTD. He's a former CIA case officer who worked on the Iran file, and he's forgotten more about the Middle East than most will ever learn. So let's see what Reuel has to say about Iran, the pending war, the region. Let's welcome him back onto the show. Welcome to the program, Reuel Marc Gerecht.
Pleasure, Jonathan.
All right. The pleasure is mine. Let's start with an update. How do you view the drama that's happening right now in Oman? What the heck is going on here?
Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure. I don't think much is going to happen there. I mean, the Iranians are going to offer the Americans anything that isn't of any value. So, they'll promise not to dig out the enriched love juice. They'll promise, something about not enriching beyond a certain percentage. But that's basically it. I think the Iranians are quite prepared to fight, actually. So I think they're going to kick it back to Trump. And I'd have to say this. I mean, predicting what Donald Trump is going to do is obviously a very dangerous game. But I once looked at the president's commentary on the Islamic Republic from 1979 to 2016. I do not recommend other people do that. But if you go back and you take a look at what he said, there's actually a consistent animus there against the Islamic Republic, which I think stems from the hostage crisis, which I suspect hasn't been forgiven in Trump's world. So
funny, I've got the same animus dating back to that same time period. Think we all kind of do, right? Fairly natural.
Yeah, I mean, times you can forget a lot, but I don't think Trump has. So, if that's true, then I'd have to say a collision is on course, but I don't know. The president operates in his own self-contained world, so I don't know what he sees as weaknesses and strengths. But on the Iranian side, which I think is more interesting, I think they're prepared to fight.
So let's talk about what that means, right? I mean, they don't have an air force. They don't have actually a standing army, right? They got the IRGC, but their army is kind of garbage, right? What is their strategy? It's undeniably asymmetric, right? I'm assuming it's fast boats and drones, and they're going to try to overwhelm the U.S. through asymmetric means. Is that kind of what you think the strategy would be? Or is there something bigger here, like a ballistic missile barrage at every country in the region? Or is it just Israel? I mean, how do you game out what the fight looks like?
Yeah, I suspect, for the most part, they'll absorb the pain, but I think they'll have to shoot something. Now, whether they, pull the trigger and go after the Saudis, maybe. I'm skeptical. I think they'll, to make themselves feel good, they'll certainly have to go after Israel, and they may shoot at an American base, though they're well aware that, they don't really have the throw weight to do a lot. So I would not expect them to exhaust their missiles. I think the one thing they fear is if somehow an American military action could produce some type of domestic contagion. So you would see the Iranians on the streets come out again. That's the thing. I mean, the Americans can't do a lot against the coercive apparatus of the Islamic Republic from the air. We can go after the bases, we can go after the command centers, we can go after cyber potential, et cetera, et cetera. But really, when it comes on the ground to the Guard Corps and the Basij, if they've been deployed out of the bases, I don't think the American military means really scares the Islamic Republic. It's really a question of whether it can reignite what had been ignited in early January.
Right. And I've got to imagine that taking out Basij bases, this is, of course, the repressive apparatus of the regime, sort of the domestic IRGC, if you will. If they're able to take out some of those assets, that could obviously encourage people to come out into the streets, maybe also taking out some of the tech that has been repressing Iranians' ability to communicate with one another. I can imagine that also might be something that could.
It's possible. I mean, the IRGC and the Basij for internal oppression are fairly decentralized. So taking out command and control, for example, in Tehran isn't going to diminish much their capacity. They'll slow it down a bit, but they grant considerable authority, so far as we can tell, to local units when they have to put down insurrection. So really, it's more rebellion than insurrection, because I don't think the opposition is that organized. So I mean, that's the great gamble. Again, would that the Americans had done this before we saw such a large bloodletting. I don't know whether the Iranians have it in themselves, particularly the Persians, who are the essential component here, if they have what it takes to go back out in the streets and sustain significant damage, because obviously the regime has now shown clearly that they're going to take automatic weapons, enfilading fire, and kill a lot of people.
Yeah, and we're over 30,000. And I think those numbers still are probably still going to tick upward.
I have to say, I don't know what the numbers really are, because everybody lies. So, but I think it's fair to say the numbers are large.
Yeah.
And it answered a question that was unanswered before. And that is, does the Islamic Republic, do the security services, can they take on and kill large number of Persians? They can kill the minorities all day long. Can they kill a large number of Persians and have the security services remain cohesive and effective? I think what we saw was an answer to that, and the answer is yes, they are prepared to kill. They have made it crystal clear that those people who rebel against the Islamic Republic are the enemies of God, and they intend to kill them.
Okay, so, I mean, we've answered sort of one question. Are they willing to be brutal enough in order to suppress this? And the answer is yes. But then I guess my question is, what's going on inside the regime? Because that can't be good either from their perspective, right? I mean, this is a regime that is in disarray. It's under a lot of pressure right now. Internally, I think there's got to be some fractures within the IRGC, within the clerical leadership. This is not playing out well, right? As the world has really come down on the regime. We've watched the IRGC get actually, hit with sanctions by the Europeans. The sense of isolation is growing. So if you're in the regime right now, how are you looking at your long-term prospects?
Well, I've debated this question with my partner in writing crime, right? Take almost every day. And, I don't think the regime, like most Middle Eastern regimes, they don't look long-term when they're confronted with the possibility of a successful rebellion. They look short-term. And I think the slaughtering of their own countrymen has probably given them new purpose and greater cohesion. I don't think it's actually fractured the ruling elite. I think it's probably brought them together.
Wow.
So I think they're in survival mode, and it's given them, I think, a renewed sense of purpose, which makes the regime actually more dangerous, certainly to the Iranian people and potentially to others elsewhere. But I don't think you're going to see the regime fracture. I think after these types of crimes, there's simply no forgiveness. And they know that. And one of the strengths of the regime has been, it's known for years that the large percentage, now certainly a vast majority of Iranians, despise it. That allows the mullahs and the Revolutionary Guard Corps to plan accordingly. So if there's anything they have planned for, it's internal rebellion. And I think there was, before January, I think there was a debate inside of the regime. There was nervousness inside of the regime. There was even greater dissent and concern about the regime's longevity and whether they should have some type of reform compromises. I think that discussion has ended. And the regime has decided that the way you handle this is brute force, and brute force applied pretty quickly.
And now we may see American brute force in response, which I suppose this will be the ultimate test. I want to just maybe try to fast forward a little bit. Like, let's just say the regime gets hit by U.S. forces. Let's see, we begin to see more fractures within the regime, that it's hastened by attacks. And let's say that the regime actually loses the ability to project some of its power around the region. We've seen it already with Hamas and Hezbollah, Syria. Iraq has gone quiet. I don't know if that means an inability to project power, but I think overall we're watching Iranian power recede on some level. So, I want to ask you about this. You studied under the great Bernard Lewis, famous professor at Princeton University, who once predicted that Turkey would become Iran and Iran would become Turkey. Do you think that's a possibility right now, as Turkey really is trying to flex more muscle, show its ability to project around the region, and the regime is losing some of that capability?
Oh, I think the Islamic Republic, so far as its external mission, is in deep trouble, and I don't think it gets to recover from the loss of Syria. I think, there was the Revolutionary Guard Corps commander in Syria, Hamdani, who died in the Battle of Aleppo in 2015. And I think Hamdani was very, very astute when he said if the Islamic Republic loses Syria, it could cause fissures and rollback in Lebanon and Iraq and even touch the homeland. I think a variation of that has actually happened. So I think the Islamic Republic, they can't revive an appealing creed. They've lost it, I think, with the Sunnis, the hope that they had that they could represent sort of the vanguard of the Islamic resistance against the United States and Israel. I think it petered out and failed amongst the Sunnis. They've got Hamas, but Hamas is obviously has a lot of trouble now. So I think their capacity to fulfill their regional ambitions has more or less been cut off at the knees. The capacity for Turkey to take their place is interesting. Obviously, Erdogan has that ambition. He's made it, I think, fairly crystal clear. He's in better shape to actually fulfill that mission because he's Sunni. Now, the population in the Near East is more evenly divided. People often forget that. They think the Sunnis are ahead of the Shia 90-10. But if you actually look in the classical region of the Middle East, it's closer to 50-50. So, but Erdogan, I think, is still in a better position. Whether he can actually create the type of missionaries that the Islamic Republic for a time was exceptionally good at is a different issue. I'm skeptical of that. I think I'm not sure if the Turks have that capacity essentially to create Arab legions. The Ottoman Empire at the Battle of Gallipoli, over 30% of the troops there were Arab. I don't think they get to repeat that type of a spree. I don't think they get to revive it. I would be shocked if the Syrian Sunnis really want to become an advanced guard for the Turks. Erdogan wants it, but whether they have the means and the capacity is a more interesting question. But they'll certainly engage in a lot of naughtiness.
Yeah, we're already seeing the naughtiness, right? We can.
I just don't know if it will rise to the level that the Iranians were able to accomplish for say 20 years.
Right. And I think that's the big question that I'd like to try to answer. I don't know if we're going to get there anytime soon, but I'm watching that space. Another space I'm watching is this. I mean, it seems ridiculous, this spat between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I tend to look at it as really bad news for the region. When they were aligned, they looked like they were funding the right things together. They were supporting the right things together, by and large, not entirely, not always in lockstep, but mostly in lockstep. Now it looks like they're fighting each other in places like Sudan and Yemen. This can't be good for cohesion in the region. How do you view this spat? Like, what's the trajectory that it takes?
Well, I think the key player here that I look at obviously is MBS. So if, I think the Crown Prince has sort of been in retreat since he lost in Yemen. And I think because of the vast expenditures of the 2030 vision, the realization that many of those expenditures aren't going to, reap the profits, may not even be finished. I think MBS has become a lot more cautious in his approach and has become more traditionally Saudi. Traditionally, Saudi has a healthy skepticism of the Emirates. And there's always been tension there, and I'm not surprised that tension is returning. What it means in the region, I don't know, because the Saudis have never been a significant military force. They've always punched way below their arsenal. The Emiratis have punched above their arsenal, but they just aren't that big of a country. They don't have that much wherewithal. And let's be frank, the Emiratis are pretty Janus-faced too. They'll say one thing publicly and they'll send a private emissary to Tehran and say, we really don't mean it. I don't know if that spat actually has a great deal of regional ramification, for the simple fact that the Saudis and the Emiratis together, assuming they were working in unison, aren't really a significant military force. I don't think the Iranians, for example, even in their weakened state, probably spend a lot of time thinking about them. They think about the Americans, they think about the Israelis. I don't think they think there's an Arab pull that if you remove the Americans, they can't handle. So the real issue for the Iranians has always been the Americans, secondarily the Israelis. It's not really, are the Saudis posing a threat? And it's certainly not, are the Emiratis posing a threat? They would much, I would argue what MBS is doing is actually to the advantage of the Iranians, but I don't think it's a huge advantage. I don't think the Tehran's going to benefit greatly from MBS's renewed caution and anxieties about his own domestic situation.
I do think he's got lots of anxieties, though. You can see that 2030 vision starting to, it looks like the wheels are coming off the bus, this economic vision. And I do think that that's probably part of it. I think good old fashioned fear as the plates shift in the region. I think that's also part of it. But everything I'm hearing right now suggests this is just a battle between two very strong-willed men, that there's really not that much more to it than a personality conflict, a sort of a tribal battle, if you will.
But certainly it isn't, there's no ideological component. We're not talking about dueling visions of Sunni fundamentalism. Those days are gone.
Well, wouldn't you say, though, that maybe the normalization part of this, the sort of more liberal approach of the Emirates as it relates to Israel, or I don't know, maybe some of the other regional players, that maybe that's kind of what's driving this?
I don't know. I think we probably differed. I never thought much that of the Abraham Accords extending to Saudi Arabia. I never thought it would happen. I don't think MBS, it wasn't in his advantage to go there. And I think what's happened since January 2023 has probably re-emphasized his earlier caution and intensified it. Is MBS really upset by, the Emirati greater liberalization towards Israel? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's, in the scheme of things, I'm not sure it ranks that high in Saudi concerns, unless for some reason it was accentuating internal Islamic dissent in Saudi Arabia that's hard for us to detect and see. And I don't know. I mean, whether Islam inside of Saudi Arabia is a fascinating question.
It is.
It is. And it's, I mean, the MBS is banking on that the growing Saudi nationalism, which is new. You know, it's one of the last Arab states to have sort of a nationalist inspiration, you might say. They're all, for the most part, fake identities. And so the Saudis are one of the last to sort of create that identity. And that's one reason that the late great Fuad Ajami was so interested in Saudi Arabia, because, as Fuad would put it, the Saudis hadn't made all the mistakes that all the other Arab regimes had. They were late to the game. Well, now we get to see whether they start making many of the mistakes that the military regimes in the Middle East had made earlier. So will there be a backlash in Saudi Arabia against MBS's, essentially creating a one-man, state? The old Saudi consensus is gone. The royal family doesn't matter as much. MBS has really taken hold of Saudi Arabia in a way that previous Saudi kings had not.
Yeah.
Does that have cause a religious backlash? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think the secularization of Saudi Arabia amongst the young appears to be quite real.
So, I think so. And we can watch those changes in real time. But certainly right now, I got to say, I'm watching some of this stuff on a regional basis. It makes me a little nervous, but you know what? I guess we're going to wait and see. All right, we got to leave it here, Reuel. We got to get on with our day. I want to thank you for joining us today on the FTD Morning Brief.
My pleasure.
All right, folks, we're done. I mean, I wish I could do this forever, but I got things to do, and so do you. So go ahead. And if you want, you can just keep reading and learning more on our website, ftd.org. Enjoy a bit of scrolling on FTD socials. And don't forget that contributions to FTD are tax deductible. Head on over to ftd.org/invest to learn more. Tune in Wednesday for another gripping episode of the FTD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FTD.